Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about that idea of separation of powers and checks and balances. One, actually two of the seven constitutional principles that we're going to be looking at here. So the problem here is how do you actually create a system that limits the power of the federal government, the national government? Because you give them too much power, especially the chief executive, and you set yourself up for some problems. And separation of powers really does exist to prevent a single political party, but more a single person in the chief executive position from getting overly too powerful and creating some kind of tyrannical government or a dictatorship. So to do that, we separate power into three branches. Okay, we have the branch that makes law, the branch that enforces law, and the branch that interprets law, and we literally do make them separate, meaning they have their own police services, they have their own um, bureaucracies, they have their own way of doing things, their own traditions, their own orders, and they are, in fact, supposed to be separate and co equal branches. Nobody is supposed to be more powerful than anybody else in the ability to make law, enforce law, and interpret law. Now, this whole system is designed to make it so that these systems can specialize in A, making law, B, enforcing law, and C, interpreting law, and that no other branch is supposed to take over that power. When that happens, it raises a lot of eyebrows. Okay, so the legislative branch, of course, is Congress, and that is discussed in the Constitution in Article 1. The executive branch that enforces law is the president. That is discussed in the Constitution in Article 2. And the judicial branch is the Supreme Court. They interpret law. That is discussed in the Constitution in Article 3. And so, like these branches of government do those specific things. Okay. Now, to make sure that nobody here gets too powerful, you have powers delegated to each branch that makes sure that basically can impact the other branches, and those are known as checks. And here are all the checks that are available from the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. First, let's make sure that we understand that the legislative branch is Congress. It makes laws. It has the House of Representatives and the Senate. A 2-year term for House, 6-year term for the Senate, 435 people for the House, 100 for the Senate. Executive branch enforces law by the president. Of course, that is one person that serves for a 4-year term. And the Supreme Court interprets law, and the primary interpreter, the very top of the courts. That is 9 people that serve for life. What we have here is checks and balances, that the legislative, executive, and judicial can actually do things to stop the other branches of government from engaging in some kind of action, or that certain actions can only be taken by that certain branch. So let's start with the executive right here in the middle, the president. What can the president do? Well, number one, the president can veto a bill that becomes a law. Now, to make a law, you have to have a bill. A bill is written by Congress, and the president can either pass or veto that. When you veto a law, it's simply saying no to it. A veto is like, nope, I am using my authority under Article 2 of the Constitution to simply say no to a proposed law. So that is a veto, is saying no to a law. They can ask Congress for war, they can propose laws, and then they nominate, meaning they like this is the person I would like to be members of the cabinet. They're informal advisors, or their formal advisors, excuse me. And then also the Supreme Court justices are nominated by the president. So the president says, that's the person I want to be my Supreme Court justice. And that's what it means to nominate, to kind of choose. But when you nominate somebody, they got to be approved by somebody else. And so let's head over to the legislative. So the legislative, number one, they override a veto. And to override a veto, you need 2/3 of the House of Representatives and the Senate. So the 2/3 of Congress to actually override a presidential veto. So the president can say no, but if a supermajority, 66% of Congress says yes, that becomes a law anyway. And it's actually really, really rare that presidential vetoes are overridden, because the president will early on in the process say, hey, I'm going to veto this if you pass this. And then laws don't even get to the president eventually. Um, of course, declaring war, the act of actually saying we are now at war. The president can ask for the war, but the people that say yes, we're going to war are actually the legislative branch. They have the official ability to declare war. Now, you might want to know, like, when's the last time we actually declared war? Well, it was World War II after Pearl Harbor. Yeah, but we've had wars before. Well, those aren't officially wars. The president does have something called war powers, where they can actually use the military for a length of time that Congress basically allows. They have essentially 2 months that they can use the military for certain actions, but they have to notify Congress, and then they have to make sure that they have a plan if they want to keep going, and they have to continually update Congress on that. But the declaration of war, like we're officially at war, that actually has to go through United States Congress and the legislative. The process of impeachment, removing both the legislative and judicial branches, that goes through Congress as well. So impeachment is removing a president or Supreme Court justice or a cabinet member from power. Okay, so that's the power of impeachment. Now, approving cabinet members and approving judges. Now, you notice the president nominated, chose, but to approve, that's got to go through Congress. In particular, it has to go through the United States Senate is the only part of Congress it has to go through. So approving cabinet members and approving judges actually happens in Congress. And then the power of the purse. Anything that says that funds anything in government, that goes through the legislative branch, Congress. So like the president is the commander in chief. He controls the military. But the people that actually pay money to the military to make sure it runs, that's Congress. So if the president ever got like really snippy about like, I'm going to do this and that with the military, Congress can literally just say like, well, I'm not going to fund that. So good luck on getting gas for your tanks because that's not happening. So money, power of the purse goes through the legislative, and again on judicial, approving judges and impeachment of justices as well. Our final look is over here on the Supreme Court, the judicial checks. Their checks are the exact same for both the legislative and executive. One, they can declare an act unconstitutional. That's their number one job. Say, nope, that law or that action is unconstitutional. So you're not going to be able to do it because we follow the law around here and you have broken it. And then finally, they're appointed for life. That is a form of a check that the president nominates them and Congress puts them in the power, and then the judiciary doesn't need to follow whatever the president or Congress wants. It follows the law. And so the reason they're appointed for life is so they're not influenced by politics. They're not influenced by elections. They're not influenced by political parties or the president or Congress people trying to press them towards something. They don't have to worry about getting reelected because they're already there. And actually, when you hear things about, well, judges need to be elected, a political scientist will say that's really a bad idea. That's actually less democratic because if a judge needs to be elected, they are no longer accountable to the law. They're not following the law. They're worried about being elected in political pressure. So you want that judge to be there for a long time so they won't be swayed by politics. So this is an example right here of separation of powers, power being broken up into three branches, and checks and balances.